And welcome back. New York City teachers and unions are fighting to keep schools closed and teachers at home nationwide. Teachers are nervous about getting back into the classroom, citing health and safety concerns as the COVID-19 pandemic stretches into a new school year on September the 1st. A new lawsuit was filed suing the country's largest school district to give every teacher the right to work remotely if they choose. But what legal criteria can be met in order to ensure the safety of educators and students for this upcoming school year? Joining us now to share a little bit more and provide some further insight is the attorney and host of today's verdict, my brother and friend, David Lesch. And good to have you, David.
Darren, always great to see you. You know, as an attorney, you usually don't see too many new issues that come up. It can be a little exciting, at least for me, whether there's issues about vaccination or issues about school and standard of care. Certainly, this one is a new one. It's basically 5 teachers who are really heading a class action in New York City, bringing in action, forcing New York City to justify why they have to go to work and why they can't work remotely. And they're basically, these 5 teachers who are leading the litigation are arguing in the lawsuit. This is really a Hobson's choice. In other words, if we don't go into school and we lose our job as a teacher, then we can't feed our families and there's an economic hardship. If we do go into school and we teach the class, there is a potential for harm to our physical bodies, and therefore somebody in our family could have, you know, dire consequences and unfortunately pass away. So we lose either way. The only way we can win is if we're able to stay at home and teach remotely. However, the City of New York Board of Education says, well, you do not meet the CNC guidelines for the ability to work from home. Therefore, you must still go in. Teachers say, hey, we have to take public transportation. That in itself is a risk. We don't know, you know, the type of setting that we're going into. We don't know exactly how it's being sanitized. We haven't been given enough information. So we believe that we've been put at harm. And that's why we are bringing this lawsuit to either force you to allow us to work remotely, or in the alternative, if we are harmed as a result of going in, there's going to be some type of damages, could be, you know, just a regular civil lawsuit, and that may end up having to go before a jury, which, you know, I'll talk to you in a second about, I think, the elements and things that you would have to prove. Again, it's all new and particularly fascinating for anybody in my field.
Yeah, but when we talk about teachers actually filing this, you said there's a few more expected to actually join in and get this kind of momentum. Let's talk about threshold, because when we remember, the governor put several thresholds out there, particularly for nursing homes, houses of worship, places like that, and increased those thresholds so high. What are we going to see legally when it comes to teachers as well as schools?
Well, you know, again, it's political, as it always is, and that's why, you know, rolled into the bill, you know, in Congress, in terms of trying to get the extra money for those who are on unemployment, is, you know, liability protections for hospitals, nursing homes, and of course schools, which Democrats don't necessarily want to, you know, to give as well, because they want to be able to hold certain institutions responsible if they aren't at least meeting certain, as you said, certain thresholds, certain criteria. So think about it from, you know, the Department of Education standpoint here. You know, well, you know, what more can we do? You know, we're doing all the protections we can, and, you know, children have to be able to go to school. That's the only way they can learn. They're our future. You know, we need you in school to protect them. The teachers are like, wait a second. You know, what about, you know, courthouses? There's no foot traffic in courthouses. That's not particularly fair. You know, you're protecting judges and you're protecting lawyers, but you're not protecting teachers. Well, it's really, you know, that's really not particularly fair to our class. Our class are teachers, and more are going to join the class. So you're going to say, well, what's the threshold here? Well, let's say this lawsuit ends up going to trial for whatever reason, or at least there's litigated on papers. Well, you have to show so many different things. First of all, there's the burden of proof. How much, the standard of care. Think about that. What's, as an attorney, you're always arguing, well, they did not meet their standard of care, whether it's an automobile accident or a ceiling collapse. What's the standard of care that has to be provided to you? Well, what's the standard of care that the Board of Education, the City of New York, has to provide? What's the level that they have to provide in terms of distancing, cleaning? Nobody knows, because nobody really knows exactly, how much care they have to provide to you. The scientific evidence isn't there yet. We didn't know what the standard of care to give in terms of nursing home residents, and then, Governor Cuomo is giving a lot of heat now in terms of transferring to the nursing homes. But at the time, we didn't know what the standard of care. Do we really know what the standard of care is now with respect to teachers? We don't. So that can change. Once you get to trial, that can completely change the standard of care. And then there's well, what's the burden of proof? Is it negligence? Is it gross negligence? Is it reckless? What's the standard as an attorney? The standard, the burden of proof, how far do you have to go? Usually it's by the preponderance of the evidence. That's like 50-50, that you have to prove that they did something wrong. Well, maybe now it's clear and convincing evidence that they did something wrong. That would be about 60%. So all of these things in flux. So it's very easy to file a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, but there's so many things that are not settled yet. And that's all the different elements that go into the lawsuit: the burden of proof, standard of care, what a jury hears in terms of the threshold, as you had said. Is it by a preponderance of the evidence, a clear and convincing of the evidence? Is it that the city is negligent, or is the city reckless? What do you have to prove? And by the way, is there going to be an immunity, Daren? There could be an immunity here for school districts, and we're not just talking about the schools of the City of New York. What about the private schools? What about the Catholic schools? All the different schools throughout New York State? It's all unsettled. So, again, it's just a strange time. It really is.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about another topic of discussion. We talk about legalities. Let's talk about the vaccine. We hear that the vaccine is making its way, and hopefully it will land in the lives of people pretty soon. But still, there's some legal concerns with regards to the vaccine. If a person is actually hurt, let's talk about that. Say, for instance, the vaccine does. There's going to be some legal ramifications with that too. So walk us through what you're hearing right now, because even though we're hearing about the vaccine, let's talk about some of the legal ramifications, because we know that's also in part why it takes so long for it to come across the desk.
The vaccination law has been around since, from my research shows, back in almost in 1905. It's been around for a long time, when our country was trying to force people to be vaccinated against smallpox. A lot of people didn't want to take the vaccine, and some people said that it actually harmed them when they took the vaccine. And the courts were a little wishy-washy as to what to do about it. But that particular area of the law has been growing. People do get hurt by vaccines. It is a fact. Now, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. It could be how the vaccine is administered, where the needle is put into the body, or the actual vaccination itself, whether it's harmful to you. There are attorneys who specialize in this. So the question is going to be, well, what is going to be the standard of care here? Is it that you were negligent in terms of the creation of the vaccination? Were you grossly negligent? We've been watching the news. I'm sure, you see it as well. They stopped one of the trials because a woman apparently developed some type of issue with respect to an inflammation in her spinal cord. Well, if this vaccine went to market and now many people end up having the same issue to their back, well, is that reckless now? Gross negligence? You had noticed that this happened to one woman and maybe in other people too, and you still let it go on the market? Again, issues we're not sure about yet. Burden of proof, what's it going to be? Will there be a blanket immunity? And this is very interesting, because this now, Daren, this relates to the schools. What if next year they say you can't put your child in class unless you show that the child was vaccinated? And the parent says, I don't trust the vaccination. We'll teach, the Board of Education says, well, that's fine, but we're not offering remote learning anymore. We expect children to come in. If you don't get vaccinated, your child's not vaccinated, you can't get an education. Well, I'm sure there'll be a lawsuit for that. So the question is,
Yeah.
So does the vaccination hurt you? Can you sue for that? And if you don't get vaccinated, can you sue because you're prevented from getting some of the, some of the benefits that society gives you, like an education? All still unsettled. And, this is, again, a whole legal area that I'm sure we'll be discussing for at least a year, if not years to come.
Yeah. In our remaining couple of minutes, let me just get here and talk about what's going on in regards to the court system. We know the court has remained open, but when we talk about jury trials, that is not actually taking place yet. So give us an update as to how things are transpiring in the court system right now.
Sure. Well, I'll give you the scoop. It looks like, from what I hear from the Bar Association and the people that are in the know, there will not be any attorneys returning to certainly Bronx County Court till at least January. That's a given. So let's say once the attorneys go back, which should happen right around that time, well, what about jury trials? I mean, that's really, what the next step. That will be even longer. Maybe the summer, if there's a vaccination, because to ask jurors to cram together in a jury box, it's a very difficult thing to do, especially on a civil case as opposed to a criminal case where you really are determining a person's right to freedom. So with respect to a civil case, I don't see jurors until at least the summer. Attorneys, they should start getting ready by January. That's from what I hear. But in the meantime, and I've told you this off camera, I'm very busy in my office. I have depositions all week long, virtual conferences with the court. I'm still meeting clients in my office, when I can. But foot traffic in the courthouse, not yet. Although judges do have to be in, clerks as well, at least a certain amount of them, but no lawyers yet. I don't see that happening until January. So this whole remote learning for attorneys, it's going to continue.
All right, DL, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much. Listen, best wishes, stay safe. And of course, as these issues continue to come before us, we'll bring you back so that way you can hash it out for us. David Lesch, our guest. Thanks much.
It's always my pleasure. Stay healthy, stay well, stay Bronx strong.
You too, DL. Stay Bronx strong. Listen, we've got more show here on Open. If you want to find out more about David Lesch, visit him on Twitter at David Lesch. Stay with us. We got more show. Open continues right after this.